The Crow should be a forgettable movie from the 90s, but the now cult classic has kept its relevance with cinephiles and soundtrack lovers. Bestowing a beautiful gift to those diehard fans is Varës Sarabande with this new release of the Crow score by Graeme Revell. Welcome to Popcorn and Vinyl, the show dedicated to films, film score, and vinyl. The Crow. What an interesting film that still enters modern film discourse. Now, part of that is the film's emotional baggage. As many will recall, the film suffered the tragic loss of the film star Brandon Lee, who died in an on-set accident. An event that has actually again become relevant with the recent tragedy on the set of the film Rust. The film went on to spawn a few sequels and a TV series, but none that really stood out, and that was likely due to losing the star from the first film. It didn't quite recover from that. I think a lot of people suspected Brandon Lee would become a big star, with this being his breakout performance. Now, this film does have a cult following, with lovers of the film and graphic novel keeping the property always in the peripherals of pop culture. The music for this film also seems to have a big fan base. This is one of those examples where I sort of cross-pollinate the soundtrack and the score in my mind. You know, I can't really separate them as easily as other films. And I think that's why it feels like there are constantly Crow releases on vinyl. But really, it's a combination of releases for the score and the soundtrack. Record Store Day releases for The Crow always seem to have a lot of chatter and anticipation for them in various vinyl communities. I get the sense that there is a huge fan base for the film music, and I can't quite tell if it's more for the soundtrack, which is a combination of alternative rock and metal, or more on the original score. But I do think it's more actually the soundtrack. For the purposes of today, we are discussing the recent Varës Sarabande release of the original score on vinyl. This was released on black vinyl as well as a limited edition gray marbled vinyl that was limited to 500 copies, and this did go fast. And I always wonder about such a limited release. Is that really an appropriate limited run that fulfills most of the demand, or are there a ton of people missing out? And I guess I would sort of have to ask you, what is an appropriately sized, limited release for a score? Obviously, it would depend on the title, but for me, 500 just seems very low. This 2 LP release features 30 minutes of previously unreleased music, which is always a welcome addition. And to be honest, I was sort of ambivalent about the release when it was first announced for pre-order. I barely remember the movie, but I do remember really liking the music. I have an odd connection to this film because I played The Crow in a high school production of the story a long time ago. I'll save the story for the post-credits scene if you want to stick around for that. I often have a hard time describing the music, so I'm just going to steal the description directly from the label. So, The Crow is a unique melange of synthesized industrial, vocal, non-Western and Western elements, with everything from tribal drumming to rock guitars, children's choir, blues riffs, and bird samples, to a 50-piece string orchestra. It is dramatically impeccable, sonically inspired, and beautifully produced. Really, that sums it up. And on paper, this should not really be a coherent score, even just based on hearing that description. But somehow, it just works. It works to picture, and it works as a standalone listening experience. Now granted, a bit of a jarring one sometimes. As you go from track to track, there is a definite shift in mood and just acoustic aesthetic. It's sort of like when you're at a restaurant and instead of a meal, you just order a whole bunch of appetizers to sample a little bit of everything, but it all just somehow works together coming from the same chef. You get different flavors and textures, much like you do in this score. There are some motifs and themes that continue throughout the score, and I actually forgot how how much presence they had in the overall score, because I think because of the memory of an old CD release that I had, and obviously it didn't have that 30 extra minutes of music. What that extra time did for me though was make the overall score feel much more cohesive and like it had more of an emotional through line than what was presented on previous album releases. As a listening experience, it can be a bit jarring and a little bit fatiguing to listen to, especially with some of those more industrial tracks. At times it could feel disjointed because the sheer amount of styles mixed together. The love theme that is reprised throughout the score in different orchestrations is absolutely beautiful, and I'm surprised that this theme isn't more well known. There are splashes of sort of film noir, blues vibes throughout. I think the rock portions also, they have a very distinctive 90s electric guitar sound to them. Some of the more ambient electronic and choral passages, those actually remind me a little bit of Graeme Revell's Tomb Raider score, although I think this is a little bit more polished and far superior. This comment probably won't make sense to anyone, or very few, but the tone of the electronic industrial tracks actually really makes me think of the Super Nintendo game Shadowrun. I'm not sure if anybody's played that one. A lot of these distinctive styles should not work together, but somehow it just works. It works for the film and even as a listening experience, even if it is a little bit disjointing at times. Return to the Grave is really a highlight of this score and is really the ultimate expression of that main love theme. This album concludes with the song It Can't Rain All the Time, which was surprising that they included on a score album. But it was just such a nice ending to the album. I'm actually really glad that they included it, and it just wraps this whole melange of music up in a very pleasing way. As for the vinyl release, it does come out on a standard black as well as a marbled gray color variant, and it really does look fantastic. At only 500 pieces, if you didn't snag a copy, you'll probably have to trade various appendages to secure a copy of it if you were to look for it now, though. I'm guessing it would be quite pricey. When it comes to the artwork and packaging, this is where my enthusiasm is more 50-50. I don't love the front cover design. For my design aesthetic preferences, it feels like the drawing of an angsty teenager trying to make some edgy art. And I know that sounds kind of like a douchebag comment, and I'm not trying to be derogatory towards the artist, but I just feel like this release could have been better, or that image wasn't the right choice for the front cover. Obviously, the imagery represents the film well. This is just not my preferred aesthetic, and I don't think it came together super well. I do, however, I love the back cover and that image of Eric Draven, and in my opinion, that would make an actual much stronger front cover. And whether they included the title on that or not, I still think it would be stronger either way, like basically just flip those around. In such an arrangement, I actually then think the front cover would be perfect for the back. It's a good piece still, and you know, that more symbolic imagery would work better in a less prominent place. It's conducive to having writing on either side, and I just think it makes more sense for the back. So obviously this is a subjective evaluation of art, but that's what I would do for that cover. I have read lots of comments of people who really do love the cover, so to each their own if you do dig that. There are two design choices on the cover that I love, however. Firstly, the focus of the image, that hand, gravestone, and title, has a really nice embossing effect to it, so they really stand out in 3 dimensions from the cover. High marks for impressive presentation. Additionally, the rain scattered across the cover is a glossy effect on a matte background. Again, very impressive and needs to be appreciated in person, I think, to get the full effect. I don't know if you could see that effect reflecting in the light at all. Now, I think it's these kind of details that really make a statement piece for a collector, something a little bit interesting. And not everybody cares about that stuff, and I respect that, but many do appreciate those unique details that make certain records stand out in a collection. This release also comes with a poster insert. I actually had this exact poster on my walls growing up. This release made me sort of think about what Varës Sarabande has done this year, including this release, and some of the stuff that they've been doing, and it seems like they have, I don't know if there's a new creative director involved or if they've decided to pivot some of their choices, but it seems like this last year and a half, they've been making more interesting, kind of cooler releases, I think, to compete with some of those boutique labels. And the stuff that they've been releasing has been really cool. They obviously have a big library of licenses. Again, I don't know how some of those work, if those carry over to vinyl from CD, but they're just doing really interesting stuff. And I'm so excited to see what they come out with in the future, because they have been on the more bland side in the past. So stuff like this, keep this coming, because this is a pretty damn cool release. Should you buy it? Maybe. This is not one that I have a super strong connection to, and I kind of wouldn't do anything to get this one. I just lucked out in getting it. I was happy to secure a copy, but if I didn't, it wouldn't be that big of a deal. And that's not at all a negative feeling towards this release, because it really is great. Ultimately, whether or not you want to hunt that down, that will be up to you. So that is it for today's episode. If you could give the video a like and consider subscribing, I would be very appreciative. Oh, yes, and the story of me being the crow. Back in high school drama class, we had a project where 4 people were chosen to adapt film scripts into plays. So the films chosen were The Truman Show, Arsenic and Old Lace, Sabrina, and The Crow. Now, I desperately did not want to be in the group that was doing The Crow, but I was sadly cast to play Eric Draven himself. And I think I was cast just because I was tall. The director of the play was an absolute lovely person. She unfortunately chose to adapt the dialogue from the graphic novel rather than the film. Now, the graphic novel's dialogue was a bit more challenging to memorize. It was a little bit more poetic, and this was by far my worst performance ever, because I could not for the life of me remember my lines because they were so difficult to memorize. And I just remember feeling awful for ruining her vision. Do you ever have those arbitrary moments from those memories from 20 years ago that you still think about from time to time and just hope nobody else remembers? I don't know. Sorry, Valerie. I like The Crow now. Anyways, that's my crow story.